And we are continuing on in chapter 3 of the real cause of global warming. The real cause of global warming. We left off on page 77, and last week the Great Kahan was reading several articles, showing the scientific articles that are showing certain things coming to pass with the drought, like the drought in California or the droughts worldwide. What's causing it? And people don't realize the significance that the microorganisms actually play, and they're beginning to understand now. They're beginning to understand now because the one sent in these last days has told them where to look. And if you remember, it's been several years ago, there was I can't remember who brought it out and who spoke on it. I think it was it was a Great Kahan that mentioned this, but he was actually showing the different areas, the different countries, the different organizations that were coming to the House of Yahweh website and learning of these very things. And among them was, of course, you had the FBI, you had the CIA, but you also had institutes of higher learning that were in there also, that were coming and they were looking and they were seeing and listening to and reading what the one sent was instructing them. And they probably said, knowing the minds of the people, they said, well, yeah, right, that's what it's doing. And then they went and they looked, and lo and behold, it was right there in front of them, just as he said. And of course, with their studies, they came out and said, "Oh, look how smart we are! Look what we found!" And that's the thing that would come to their, that undoubtedly came to the minds, because not once did you ever see in there. This research was credited, the findings were credited to the one sent in these last days, the pastor and overseer, Yisrayl Hawkins, for telling us where to look. Did any of that ever come out in these articles? No. But we know where they came from because they did not find it until the one sent told them where to look. The things weren't there. But you see here the cause, what's wiping out the starfish. And we found that the same thing that's wiping out the starfish and the corals, the same diseases, are actually also affecting the atmosphere. They're affecting the firmament, the microorganisms in the firmament. And those microorganisms, they're sick. They can't do their jobs correctly. There was something, I don't know if it was mentioned last class, but there was something that Pastor mentioned over here on page 69, and I think it's an awesome way to look at it. And you can see the wisdom of Yahweh, and you can see how Yahweh is guiding Pastor with these words and how he's guiding the way these things are written. And he described this whole process like your body as a service in your family. You remember that? It was back on page 69 where he talks about as an individual you have responsibilities in the home. You have, one individual may have a responsibility of doing laundry, another one maybe the dishes, maybe another one the cooking, and everybody kind of has a shared responsibility of trying to pick up the house. And when one of those members are sick, then the work kind of gets piled on to somebody else until that individual is actually able to go ahead and pick up their workload. But if the sickness continues to develop, then the whole body, the whole household suffers. And he put it in a way that every one of us here can relate to. Because we're all part of a family. We know how that is, how when everybody helps, everything works, works much better and much more efficiently. And he says the firmament as a family of bodies. And then he showed how each kingdom is set by law to perform their service to the family. And remember, these things were created, for the service of mankind. And when these microorganisms get sick, then they cannot, just as they do in our family, then they cannot work to their full potential. And eventually they get overwhelmed. They get overwhelmed, they get stressed, and then their jobs aren't done as well as they need to be done. And things start slipping by. Things don't get done. And this is what we see in the firmament. This is what we see with these things. And, mankind is continually adding layer upon layer upon layer of sin. They're continuing to add stress to the microorganisms in the firmament, the microorganisms in the soil, in the ground, in the water. All of these things. All of these things are being taxed. And then one of the last things the great Kahan was speaking on last week was talking about drugs getting into the water supply. And it's all because of sin. And not only the people's turning to pharmaceuticals to get relief from the curses that they're bringing upon themselves, so they can get relief from these things, so they can go on and continue to sin. That's what they're looking for. That's what they're striving for. That's their solution. Oh, take this away. Take the pain away so I can continue to sin. And not only are they doing that, but they're also not processing waste in the way that they're supposed to be doing. So these drugs and stuff, they get into the body, and they're not completely used by the body. Some of these things pass through. A lot of things pass through. And then it gets right into the water supply. Well, since things aren't being handled correctly, the waste isn't being properly treated. The microorganisms that are built, that Yahweh placed in the earth to be able to handle and to be able to deal with these things, they can't. They can't do their job. So these things are slipping into the water supply. And you got all kinds of things they were showing. Drugs for pain medication, for infection. You got antibiotics. You got drugs for mental health reasons, mental health illnesses. All of these things are being found. Cancer treatments for AIDS. You've got all of these things that are there, the drugs that are in there. Not to mention the viruses and the bacteria and the diseases that are being shed themselves into the water as well. And all of this is being run through and cycled through their cleansing process, which they showed here in this one article over here, that the federal government doesn't even require any testing and hasn't set any safety limits on drugs in the water. They haven't done anything to resolve any of this. There is nothing that can be done with the way that mankind is running things now. There's nothing positive that can be done. The only thing they can do, as Acts shows, is to repent and to become converted. To stop sinning and stop bringing these things upon yourself, and to put an end to this cycle. And that's what we're going to wind up doing. This is what we're going to be teaching the nations to do. This is what we're going to be teaching the 2 billion to do when they come to the house of Yahweh. We're going to be teaching them how to stop that cycle and how to effectively deal with these, with the carnal mind, with these desires when they come up. We're going to teach them the very things that we are learning now. And men, we're all going through things. We have all in our lives gone through certain things. We're all going through things now in our day-to-day struggles. We go through day-to-day struggles in our minds with the people that we work with. It's with our health. We all go through these things. But we're putting the laws of Yahweh into practice, and we are going to be able to witness to those who have these similar issues when they come out of this world. This is what works for me. This is what worked. And it was simply applying these laws to put a stop to adding to it, so that we can actually start reducing the things that are causing the problems. And he talked about the superbugs. They're breeding and spreading drug-resistant genes at water treatment plants. All with the water. We can't live without water. You cannot live without water. You can't live without food either. But you can live a little bit longer without food than you can without water. And then we see Legionnaire's disease, bacteria lurk in tap water. So look at all of these articles that were coming out. Cocaine, spices, hormones found in drinking water. From heroin to rocket fuel and birth control pills. All of these things are found in the water supply. And then at the top of page 77, where it says, disease epidemics, why no real cures? These these things, one of the last articles he read was this newly identified strains of chlamydia, trachomatis, and chlamydia trachomatis. It could produce new diseases, and it shows this was evolving through a process called recombination, where genes from one or more strains combine to create new strains. So these things are passing between one another, and they're actually recombining and getting adding together and say, okay, well, this part from this one, this part from this one, now you've got a brand new one. And then now you've got that brand new one merging with another brand new one to create something completely different. All of these things, and they're continuing to evolve. They're continuing to change. They're continuing to mutate. The great Kahan Yedidia mentioned them. He called them, I think the word he used was shapeshifters. They change. When you think that the body thinks, or mankind thinks that through their drugs they've got something identified that they can wipe it out. By the time they figured that out, it's already changed and mutated into something else. And they're always playing catch up. And these things they're mutating faster and faster. And this is where we are. Deadly viruses mutating faster than before. Deadly viruses are mutating to infect humans at a rate never seen before. It says at least one new disease is jumping the species barrier from animals to human beings every year. At least one new one every year. Exposing people to emerging germs at a rate that may be unprecedented. Remember the warning that was given. This is going to be a time of trouble such as not come to pass from the beginning until this time, and then it won't be. There will never ever be a time like this. I don't know if we just realize just how dangerous and how perilous these times are. Just how much sickness and disease is out there. Just how much the confusion of mind is out there. If we don't have to go out into the world, don't go. Pastor has told us that, and he tells us that not to prevent us, not to keep us from going out and doing things, but it's for our protection. If we have to go, then, if we have to, make sure we have to. Don't make excuses. Oh, I really need to go do this, but I'm going to swing by over here and go do this at the same time and this over here. Maybe I'm going to go over here and just kind of look around and see what's there. Don't get caught up in that. Pastor said in one of his sermons one time, talking about the ability that Satan has to be able to, that she has the ability to convince people of anything. And I remember him saying this. He said, Satan could have you convinced to buy a steamboat 40 miles away from a water source. And we could justify it. We could rationalize it and justify it in our mind as to why we need that steamboat 40 miles away from a river. Don't do that. Don't rationalize and justify things in our minds. Because we can talk ourselves into anything. And we can talk ourselves right out of Yahweh's house if we're not careful. But these viruses, it says that the first work to catalog a range of germs capable of infecting people has disclosed that 38 new human pathogens have emerged in the past 25 years. That's over more than one a year. 3/4 of these, including AIDS, avian flu, SARS, and a new variant of CJD, which is that Crutchfield-Jacob disease, originated as animal diseases. That's where they originated. They originated as animal diseases. And we know the sin that allows transmission from something that belongs to an animal to jump over into a human. It's that sin that causes these things. The survey was led by Mark Woolhouse of the University of Edinburgh, has identified more than 1,400 pathogens that can cause disease in human beings, at least 800 of which are across the species barrier from animals. Okay? There was an article that came out 2 days ago, and it was entitled, it says there's a life-threatening condition. It's called this it's a life-threatening condition is on the rise. Anybody ever heard of sepsis? Okay, praise Yahweh. And this is what this is talking about. This is talking about something called sepsis. And remember how we're told to protect ourselves when we go out into the world? We're told to spray ourselves down with certain stuff, with a certain type of soap, with certain types of oils and things like this, in order to help prevent these things from taking hold. Well, this one here says biting your nails won't just give you ragged edges, it could also put you at risk for sepsis, a serious, potentially life-threatening complication of an infection. And I'm just going to read the highlighted parts here. It says, recently there was actually an actress. There was an actress who passed away in third Roman month of this year who died from sepsis due to sepsis from an unknown origin. They don't even know where it came from. It says, of the roughly 1 million Americans who get sepsis each year, approximately 250,000 people die. It says, the number of sepsis cases per year has been on the rise in America, according to the National Institute of Health. Some medical experts say that this is due in part to an uptick in drug-resistant bacteria. Okay, so this drug-resistant bacteria, they're saying, is part of the reason for this. It says, but it's technically a condition that occurs, and they want to know what is sepsis and how is it different from a regular infection. It says it's technically a condition that occurs when the body launches an extreme response to an infection, bacterial, viral, or fungal that you already have. It's not a disease caused by a specific agent. Notice there's not a specific trigger to it. It can be triggered by anything. Explains David Cutler, MD of Family Medicine, physician for Providence St. John's Health Center in Santa Monica, California. So unlike strep throat or bacterial meningitis, no single cause for sepsis exists. It says what causes it? It forms when an infection that you already have triggers an intense immune system reaction which sends harmful inflammatory chemicals into the bloodstream. These chemicals cause blood clots and leaky blood vessels which can block the flow of blood to your organs and potentially cause them to shut down, according to the National Institute for Health. And he says, here's where it gets really freaky. It doesn't take a major infection to cause the problem. Sometimes minor infections progress and even trigger a sepsis response. And it can even be triggered when no infectious cause is found, which takes place about half the time. Okay, so it's an immune system response to something. It says sepsis is most commonly caused by pneumonia, abdominal infections, urinary tract infections, or skin infections. And it goes through some of the symptoms, which are feeling like your heart's racing, having fever, shivering, or feeling very cold, extreme pain, clammy, sweaty skin, things like this. And they say if you have sepsis, you'll be treated with antibiotics to fight off the infection. Depending on how far it's progressed, you might be given oxygen or IV fluids to keep enough blood flowing to your organs to prevent a dangerous drop in blood pressure. In very serious cases, you might also need a respirator, kidney dialysis, or surgery. Okay, so it's it can be brought on by anything, and they don't know what triggers it. It can be many different things, but it's another reason, men. Another thing that we've been cautioned against. The one article, at the beginning of the article, it showed, this guy was chewing on his fingernails. Well, how did he pick it up? Well, he picked it up through touch, probably going out in the world. He was somewhere out in the world touching who knows what, because everybody touches who knows what out there. Okay? And if we don't take the proper precautions like we've been instructed to, then we run the risk of getting these things on ourselves if we don't heed the instructions that have come forth from our pastor. Okay? But you can see just how deadly that is and how serious it is. And again, that is something that is that is on the rise. There's another one here that was mentioned. They call it CDI, or Clostridium difficile disease, is increasing, and the severity of so is the severity of those infections. It says the changes in these diseases are likely related to the emergence of new epidemic strains. So we're talking about the mutation. We're talking about these things transferring, mutating and changing. And then that CDI. I'm just going to call it CDI. It's an infection due to the spore-forming bacterium Clostridium difficile, and symptoms include, and it shows the symptoms here of diarrhea, fever, nausea, abdominal pain, and it said it's spread by bacterial pores found within feces. So that's how it's spread. Okay, and these things can get easily picked up in the world, very, very easily. Surfaces may become contaminated with the spores, with further spread occurring by the hands. Further spread coming by the hands of healthcare workers. It says risk factors of the infection include antibiotic and some proton. They call it proton pump inhibitors use. Now notice this next one: hospitalization. Remember how dirty and nasty the hospitals are, and this is where some of these things are picked up. Other health problems and older age. Prevention is by hand washing, terminal room cleaning, in other words, cleanliness. Following the laws that were given to maintain cleanliness. Using the things that Pastor has given us, using the things that he's taught us to make ourselves clean. And notice the other one here, it says limiting antibiotic use. Discontinuation of antibiotics may result in a resolution of symptoms within 3 days. So, and then I will notice here this blue section down here. Well, it says right above that, it says the CDI infections occur in all areas of the world. About 453,000 cases occur in the United States in 2011, resulting in 29,000 deaths. So you can see these things are deadly. Rates of this disease globally have increased between 2001 and 2016. The bacterium, notice this, the bacterium was discovered in 1935 and was found to be disease-causing in 1978 in this generation. It was discovered. They found it in 1935. Okay, and it's increased and it's disease-causing in 1978, and you can see here it says healthcare-associated infections increase the cost of care by $1.5 billion each year. So you see the cost associated with that as well. But gonorrhea, notice here on page 78, gonorrhea steals DNA from humans. It says researchers have discovered the first case of a direct transfer of human DNA fragment to a bacterial genome. The guilty party? Gonorrhea. And it says that this Neisseria gonorrhea, the bacteria responsible for gonorrhea, has stolen a sequence of DNA bases, and then you see adenine, you see the 4 DNA bases there, from an L1 DNA element found in humans. And notice it says here that human DNA to bacterium is a very large jump. Okay? It's not insignificant. They're saying it's a very significant thing. This bacterium had to overcome several obstacles in order to acquire this DNA sequence. Remember, we talked about these things, jumping these species barriers and these things evolving and coming together. Well, and it had to overcome several obstacles in order to acquire this DNA sequence. The next step is to figure out what this piece of DNA is doing. And you can be rest assured it is not beneficial for the person that has it. Pastor writes here, he says, drinking your own urine is prophesied for this time period. Drinking their own urine occurred before in the land of Israel, but this time it will occur in all nations. It will be much worse than in past history and is shown by Yeshua Messiah. All plagues will be worse than ever before in this history. Remember the plagues that decimated the Roman Empire. Pastor's beginning to touch on that about the Black Death, the Black Plague. He's telling us, he's showing us how these things progressed. But it's going to be worse. It's going to be even worse than that time. He says he shows that in this generation will experience the worst wars and hatred among the kingdoms and the nations, the worst weather conditions, the worst weather-related disasters, the worst drought, resulting in food shortage and famine, and the worst disease epidemics ever. It's because this is the accumulation of what sin brings. This is how bad it gets before mankind would become extinct. Yahweh is making sure mankind learns this lesson. And he won't step in until there is absolutely no hope for mankind. But in Matthew 24, 21 to 22, it shows, "For then will be great tribulation, such as not come to pass since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever will be." And then we see the severity, and it shows that unless those days were shortened, there would no flesh be saved. But for the elect's sake, those days will be shortened. And then Matthew 24, 3 and 7, he shows what will be the sign of your coming in the end of the ages. When will these things be? And then we see the time period that he was showing here. He shows that nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And there will be famines and pestilence, that is disease epidemics, and earthquakes. And Pastor goes to show that this word earthquake actually means environmental disasters. It's not just a shaking of the earth, a physical shaking of the earth. But it's talking about how the earth has become defiled and the result of it, all of these environmental disasters in place after place. And we're seeing those things now. And we're seeing them on the increase. Verse 3 shows the events that Yahshua speaks of will take place in the time period called the last days. And some render this as the end, as it is correctly stated, the end of the ages. And that verse clearly shows this is a time period in Matthew 24:34, which shows that this generation that began in 1934 is not going to pass away until all of these things are fulfilled, until everything is fulfilled. So this is this last generation. We are going to see these things come to pass. When you couple these verses together, Pastor shows here, he says, you find the worst of all of these things are prophesied for this present prophesied generation. And then he shows us when you see all of these things in Matthew 24:33. Then in 24:3, the end of the ages, and then 24:14, the end. It says, and then in Matthew 24:33, these things named here. The time period shown in these verses are referencing to one generation, as we see there in the next verse. That generation that sees these things come to pass, that generation will not pass until all of these things are fulfilled. And then he shows here, he says, deception is shown to be great. This time period, deception is shown to be great. Satan knows her time is getting short. And she is going to do everything she can to cause deception to enter into your mind. She's going to cause influences to come about. And that's what she does. Remember in Genesis chapter 3. It shows there that Eve was influenced to commit sin through Satan's messenger, through the smooth words. Remember, like I said, I think it's in Proverbs either 6 or 7, where it talks about the seducing adulteress, how she entices people with her smooth words. And all of a sudden, these people, they're just kind of lulled into this. All these words are so beautiful. They're so soothing. They're so pleasant to the ear. And all of a sudden, they're wandering. They're walking after her. They're following in her ways. They've listened to what the smooth adulteress has said, instead of listening to the one that was placed over them has said. But it shows Matthew 24:21 to 22 shows this worst time ever. And then we see in 24:11 here it says that many false prophets will arise and will deceive the many. And the deception comes about, we know deception comes about from many different angles. And the only way that we can protect ourselves against this deception is to make sure that we're reading and studying. We need to make sure that we're picking up the book of Yahweh. We need to make sure we're picking up the book of Yisrayl. and studying the things that Pastor is showing us. There's a lot of research and a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of experience that he has, and you look at the amount of time that he spent in the Scriptures, and he's sharing that with us. With the time that's left, man, there's absolutely no way that we could ever attain that knowledge that Pastor has. We're not going to catch up to him. We can try. It's definitely something to strive for. We can try to get as much of this in our minds as we can. But remember what Yeshua said. It said a servant will never be greater than their teacher. A servant will never be greater than their teacher. We're always going to have someone teaching us. But we have to make sure that we listen. We have to make sure we follow very carefully the instructions that we're given. The law tells us, Yeshua told us, narrow is the way, and narrow is the gate that enters into the kingdom. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself here a little bit. But it's a straight and narrow way. But that broad way and the broad way and the broad gate is the one that leads to destruction. And that's what all of Christianity teaches. All of the religions that are out there, the thousands of religions that are out there, they all teach a very simple way to salvation. Just believe. And really the way to salvation is simple. But it's obedience. Obedience to the one sent. Obedience to the 613 laws of Yahweh. These 613 laws of Yahweh, they're our friend. They're not our enemy. The world wants you to think that these rules, that these laws are your enemy. The enemy is the one who teaches contrary to those laws. And those people that teach contrary to those laws, they definitely don't have any love for one another. Because it's these very laws, they teach mankind how to love one another, how to show one another the proper respect. How to show proper respect to ourselves and conducting ourselves in a way where we don't destroy our own bodies. Mankind is destroying themselves. They're destroying their own bodies. But yet the world flocks to these many false prophets, and they will deceive the many. And Pastor writes here, he says, if you noticed, the sodomites, the popes, and even the Christian preachers, whatever, are openly showing dishonor to the inspired Scriptures and the laws of righteousness taught by the prophets, the apostles, and the Savior, Yahshua Messiah. They're openly defiant. If you go back to what's written there in the Proverbs, I think it's either 6 or 7, the seducing adulteress. What does she do with that young man? How does she convince him? With a brazen face, she speaks to him with this brazen face. And that means insolence. That means out and out rebellious insolence. It's a very, very high degree of disrespect. And this is what the churches are doing. This is what the religions are doing when they teach contrary to what's written in the Bible, to what's written in the Holy Scriptures. They are showing the utmost disrespect to the one who paid the penalty for our past sins. They're showing the ultimate disrespect to Father Yahweh, who wants them. He doesn't want anyone to perish, but he wants everybody to come to the realization that these laws are their friends. And brothers, that's what we're going to be teaching the people, that these laws are your friends. They're going to keep you from the defilement that's in this world. They use the name Jesus Christ, which has plainly been shown to be made up from the names of 2 pagan gods chosen by the Pope Constantine to replace the name of the true Savior, Yahshua. Even the name of the Creator, Yahweh, was replaced. Read the following facts. Okay, and this has appeared in many prophetic words, many newsletters. So we're just going to kind of hit some of the highlights on it. But the First Council of Nicaea and the missing records. And this article came from Nexus magazine, and this was it says volume 14, number 4. I'm not sure what the date is. But it shows here the Council of Nicaea was this ecclesiastical gathering in history, was known as the Council of Nicaea. And the author here shows it was a bizarre event. It was really odd. It was a bizarre event that provided many details of early clerical thinking and presents a clear picture of the intellectual climate prevailing at that time. Now, Pope Constantine here shows about 4 years prior to chairing the council, Constantine was initiated into the religious order of Sol Invictus, which was one of the thriving cults of the sun-worshipping cults at the time. It shows here the other one was Mithraism. So you had two of them. But because of his sun worship, he instructed to have to convene this on the first of three settings. It says on the summer solstice of the 21st day of the 6th Roman month of 325. And this is actually shown. Now I want you to notice something, because it shows here where this person got this research from. So when somebody tries to say this is somebody just making this up, the side notes in parentheses behind this is showing where the documentation came from. So it's documented where it came from. This isn't somebody just making this up. But that came from the encyclopedia, the Catholic Encyclopedia. And it was held in the hall of this Osias's palace. And then this guy here, this doctor that did this research, it looks like, it says, from his extensive research into church councils, Dr. Watson concluded that the clergy at the Council of Nicaea were all under the power of the devil, and the convention was composed of the lowest rabble and patronized the vilest abominations. So he even saw the spirit that was there and who it was that was running this show. And he says it was an infantile body of men who were responsible, or it was that infantile body of men that were responsible for the commencement of a new religion in the theological creation of Jesus Christ. It says Constantine's intention at Nicaea was to create an entirely new God for his empire who would unite all religious factions under one deity. And remember, the Roman Empire was in great disarray at that time. And this was what Constantine was trying to do. He was trying to unite everything under one God to try to get everything settled down. But he had to make sure that he had to try to please everybody. Okay? So, and the people that made up the presbyters were asked to debate and decide who their new God would be. And they actually they had 53 gods were tabled for discussion. 1 year and 5 months that they continued with that. And at the end of that time, Constantine came back to the gathering to found that they hadn't agreed on a new God yet, but they had it narrowed down to 5. And you see those 5 there. It was Caesar, Krishna, Mithra, Horus, and Zeus. And then Constantine, it shows here, he was the ruling spirit at Nicaea, and he ultimately decided on a new God for them. So it was left up to him. So he said, you guys can't come to it, I'll make it up, I'll do it. And it says, to involve the British factions, he ruled that the name of the Druid god Jesus be joined with the Eastern Savior God Krishna, and thus Jesus Krishna would be the official name of the new Roman God. Okay, but that wasn't the end of it. He said, okay, this is who it's going to be. It's going to be a combination of these two. And then what did they do? And then he said a vote was taken. So he put it to the vote of the council. And it was with a majority show of hands, it was 161 votes to 157 that both of these divinities would become one God. Okay, so it was a democratic, it was a democracy type of thing. It was, okay, all in favor, all for, yay, all against, nay. And okay, well, the yeas won. So Constantine used this official gathering, and notice that was following a long-standing heathen custom. Constantine used the official gathering and the Roman apotheosis decree to legally deify two deities as one. So he created them, just like they do with laws today. You know, the laws go to the Senate, laws go to the House, and then, you know, they're passed. They are passed. So, but it's done by voting, by this consent. And this says a new God was officially claimed and officially ratified by Constantine. It says that purely political act of deification effectively and legally placed Jesus and Krishna among the Roman gods as one individual composite. Now, when somebody dies, when a pope dies, or someone dies, there's a certain process that the church goes through in order to actually deify this person as a saint, right? There's actually a process that goes through in order for this individual to qualify as a saint. And this is very similar to what they did here. It says that abstraction lent earthly existence to amalgamated doctrines, and that means just to merge everything into one. But to the amalgamated doctrines of the empire's new religion, because there was no letter J in the alphabets until around the 16th century, the name subsequently evolved into Jesus Christ. So even here, it shows that, hey, there was no letter J in the 1500s, so they had to create it. So that's how Jesus Christ came about. Now, in the Catechism of the Catholic Church, we also see here these things about the name of Yahweh and how that actually was hidden. Now, think about the subtleness, think about the craftiness that this divining serpent here, in what she does and what she says, and how she subtly leads people down a path to where all of a sudden now it's okay to not use the name of Yahweh. But it shows here in this first one here, it says, God reveals his name. And this is according to the Catechism of the Catholic Church. And it says, God revealed his name to his people Israel by making his name known to them. Okay, a name expresses, now notice what they're saying here. Notice how they put it. Notice what they're saying the importance to a name is. A name expresses a person's essence and identity and the meaning of this person's life. Okay, remember what the name of Yahweh means. Remember what it stands for. Remember it embodies all of his perfect, 13 perfect righteous attributes are all in that name. Because remember, that name was revealed in Moshe, remember? But that's what the name embodies, and the Catholic, they acknowledge that. And it says, God has a name. He is not an anonymous force. To disclose one's name is to make oneself known to others. In a way, it is to hand oneself over by becoming accessible, capable of being known more intimately, and addressed personally. So look at the importance there that they put, that they acknowledge with the name of Yahweh, with how important it is. But now look, that was in 203, and I've never looked at the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I don't know if these are just paragraphs that go down, but you got 3 numbers down for 206. Notice how it starts off. In revealing his mysterious name, wait a minute. Now they're saying his name is mysterious. But they plainly showed that the name was revealed. If something's revealed, why is it? It can't be a mystery, right? But look at the words. Look how they're shaping the minds of the people, and trying to get them focused to carry out this deception. And you'll see the full reason behind that deception and the importance of it here in a second. But in revealing his mysterious name, Yahweh, YHWH, I am who is, I am who am, I am who I am. Notice it says, God says who he is and what name he's to be called. Pretty cut and dry, right? Okay, we're supposed to use the name of Yahweh. It's a mysterious name, but we're supposed to use it. Now look at 209. Now, out of respect for the holiness of God, the people of Israel do not pronounce his name. Why? If the name wasn't supposed to be pronounced, it wouldn't have been revealed in the first place. But look at the deception. Look how they're leading the people, and how they're trying to convince the people that what they're doing by taking the name out, it's a righteous thing. It's an honorable thing. But in doing that, they've taken away everything they talked about in that 203. Out of respect for the holiness of God, the people of Israel do not pronounce his name. In the reading of the sacred scripture, the revealed name Yahweh is replaced by the divine title Lord. It is under this title that the divinity of Jesus will be acclaimed. Jesus is Lord. So look what they've done there too. Not only did they say, well, we're not going to use the name because it's too holy to pronounce, and we're going to do this respectfully, but they also threw in the idea of a duality or a trinity. Because now they're saying Jesus Christ and the Creator are one and the same. You see what they did? You see how subtle that is. You see how subtle and crafty that is. And I'd be willing to bet that people don't catch it. They don't see it. They're not getting it. Under number 4, Lord. In the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the ineffable. Now the name of Yahweh is ineffable. Oh, you can't pronounce it now. But back up here it said this is the name by the name he is to be known and how he's to be called. But now it's an ineffable name. You see the confusion. By which God revealed himself to Moses is rendered as Kyrios, or Lord. From then on, Lord becomes the more usual name by which to indicate the divinity of Israel's God. The New Testament uses this in the full sense title of Lord for both the Father and what is new for Jesus, who is thereby recognized as God himself. So you can see what they did. You can see how they walked the people through. And they have got them convinced that what they're saying here in 446 is perfectly acceptable. But it shows here, it says the Hebrew word rendered false prophet in Matthew 24:11 actually means religious impostors. Remember, Yahshua is speaking of the last days and the last prophesied generation. An impostor is in fact anyone and everyone who is not part of the prophesied work of Yahweh. Okay? As in the beginning, it was Yahweh's plan. But going back to what was done here, what was the significance of removing the name of Yahweh and replacing it with Lord? It seems like a pretty minor thing, right? To the world, yes, it seems minor. But look at this law here in Deuteronomy 12:5-8. But you are to seek the habitation of your father, the house of Yahweh, the place which Yahweh your father shall choose out of all your tribes to establish his name, and there you must go. So what they were doing, you know what they were doing, they're trying, we're going to keep people from going to the house of Yahweh. We're going to convince them that it's okay to go to the house of the Lord, the house of God, house of Baal, whatever, and it's just as good as what they're going to say. Right? But notice there you must bring your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, and your special gifts you vowed to give, your free will offerings, and your firstborn of your herds and flocks. And there in front of Yahweh your Father, you and your families shall eat, and you shall rejoice in all that you put your hand to do, because Yahweh your Father has blessed you. You are blessed when you go to the house of Yahweh. Now notice verse 8, you must not do as we are doing here this day, every man doing what is right in his own eyes. Well, the reason we come to Yahweh's house is to do what? Isaiah 2:2, Micaiah chapter 4 tells us that we come here to learn of Yahweh's ways, to walk in his paths, so that we can learn how to beat the swords into plowshares and the spears into pruning hooks. We come here, that's why we're told to take the second tithe and to take it to the place that Yahweh has chosen. Yahweh made a way. He's taken away the excuse. I can't afford to go to Yahweh's house. It's too far away. I don't have the money to do it. That's why we have the law concerning the second tithe. Set your second tithe aside. And then you take that and you go to Yahweh's house. And if it's too far for you, then you exchange it into money so that you can go. See, he's created a savings plan so that we're without excuse if we don't come to Yahweh's house at the times that he's appointed. So Yahweh's thought all of this stuff through. You know, as it shows here. It was in the beginning. It was all in the plan of Yahweh. Everything was done according to this plan. And nothing was done, as it says in 1 Yochanan 1:1-3. In the beginning was the plan of Yahweh, and the plan was with Yahweh, and the plan was Yahweh's. And that same plan was in the beginning with Yahweh. And all things were done according to it. Without it, nothing was done that was done. Yahweh's in complete control. Everything that he sets out in his plan is going to take place. That is rest assured. We can bet our very lives on that, because it will. Remember, Genesis 1:26 shows, I will make man in my image according to my likeness. And how is that done? That's done through the teaching of the laws, because Psalm shows us that the laws of Yahweh are perfect. Converting the person, making the testimony of Yahweh is sure, making the simple ones wise. Gives understanding to the eyes. It gives us this wisdom, as Proverbs shows. Remember, Daniel also showed that the wicked are not going to understand these things, but the wise, those who are wise, will understand. But study closely, Pastor shows here in Amos 3:7. Most assuredly, Father Yahweh will have no work other than the work he has prophesied in advance by his servants, the prophets. And then in Micaiah 4:1-3, we see in the last days it will come to pass that the mountain of the promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established in the chief of the nations. It has been established in the chief of the nations, and it will be raised above all congregations. Slowly but surely it is being raised above all congregations in Yahweh's time, and all nations are eventually going to flow to it. And we see here that many people are going to say, come and let us go to the mountain, to the uplifting of Yahweh, and to the house of the Father of Jacob. And notice why they come here. And he will teach us of his ways. And we will walk in his paths. We come here to learn. To learn so that we can obey. That's why we come to Yahweh's house. We come here to learn so that we can obey, so that we can come out from among them and be separate, says Yahweh. That's what we're instructed to do. And that's how we do it. We come to Yahweh's house, we sit at the feet of the greatest teacher in the world, we listen, we learn, and we obey. That's how we do it. It's plain and simple. And he will judge, notice this, he will judge between many people and rebuke strong nations from afar off, and they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, nor will they learn war anymore. Remember the words of Yeshua Messiah in Matthew 6:33. Seek first the kingdom of Yahweh and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. Remember in Luke 24:25, and he said to them, O fools and slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Yahweh's house, this is the only place on the face of the earth that righteousness is taught. You're not going to find it anywhere else. You will find sin taught everywhere else in the world. You will find a mixture of righteousness and evil. That tree of righteousness and evil is out there, all over the place. But the tree of righteousness, the tree of life, right here, nowhere else. And in the last days, Yahweh will establish his house, and he did it. Yahweh established his house in this prophesied generation. And the details, you can take a look at the booklet, The House of Yahweh Established. Excruciating detail, minute detail of the prophecies that were fulfilled, that were made thousands of years ago and were fulfilled in this generation by this era, by the last day's witness. His house is prophesied to teach Yahweh's laws of righteousness, turning people to Yahweh and his righteousness. And so we see here in 1 Yochanan chapter 3, verses 4, verses 7 and 8, and verse 10. Very familiar. We can probably quote this. We can probably rattle it off the top of our head. But take the time and read and to reiterate, to get these things in our minds. Because in this generation, remember, we just saw the deception is going to be the greatest time period, the greatest deception of all. And the protection from that deception is going to be being firmly grounded, firmly established, firmly rooted in the laws of righteousness, in these laws and the prophecies. We don't have a lot of time. There's not much time left. So we have to make sure that we redeem that time, that we firmly get these things established in our minds, because we never know who's going to come up and start whispering in our ear. Has Yahweh indeed said that you need to do this? Does he really say that? Well, 1 Yochanan 3, 4, 7, and 8, and verse 10. Whoever commits sin transgresses also the laws, for sin is the transgression of the law. Little children, let no man deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous. Think about all the scriptures that should be coming to your mind when we're reading these. Just as he is righteous. He who commits sin, he who breaks the law of Yahweh, is of the devil. Romans 6:16. You belong to whom you obey. In this, the children of Yahweh and the children of the devil are manifest. Whoever does not practice righteousness is not of Yahweh, and he does not love his neighbor. Religious impostors, notice this. Remember what Pastor showed us over here, what a religious impostor was. A religious impostor is anyone who teaches contrary, who is not part of this prophesied work in these last days. Everyone else is a religious impostor. And by their fruits, you're going to know them. By their fruits you will know them. Religious impostors cannot teach Yahweh's righteousness. Search the words of every religion in the world. Not one of them teaches you to practice Yahweh's righteousness. The only place you will seek and find it is taught is the house of Yahweh. Again, Matthew 6:33, seek first the kingdom of Yahweh and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. It should be our primary reason, our first priority. All of these things will be added to us, but we need to make sure our focus is right. Get our focus right. Deuteronomy 12:5, but we're to seek the habitation of the house of your father, the house of Yahweh, the place which Yahweh your father will choose out of all of your tribes to establish his name. And there you must go. And then again in Micaiah 4:1-3, but in the last days it will come to pass, it has come to pass, that the mountain of the promotion of the house of Yahweh will be established in the chief of the nations. It has been established. And then we see that many people again, we're going to have 2 billion people coming. It's going to start slow, but as the times get worse, it's going to speed up, and we need to be ready. And it will teach us of his ways, and we will walk in his paths. And again, it shows here that this priest who teaches peace here was judged between many people and rebuked strong nations afar off. Yes, they are, with the correction. Correction goes forth with every publication, with every sermon that's given. And they will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not lift up sword against nation, neither will they learn war anymore. This comes straight from the mouth of the Savior. Notice again in Matthew 7:13-20. And see, here we see, enter in through the narrow gate. We see that narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and broad is the way that leads to destruction. A great Kahan, he got up and he showed us these things in the numbers. This broad way, how broad this way is, and how this broad way leads to destruction. And there are many who go that way, but straight is the gate, and narrow is the way which leads to life. And there are few who find it. Yes, there are very few. Compared to the religions in the world, compared to the world population, we're very few in number. But Yahweh doesn't need a lot of people to accomplish his work. Notice verse 15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. That should bring to mind the Peaceful Solution Character Education Program. It teaches you to make choices on your friends based on what? On what? Praise Yahweh. On character, not on what? Personality. Praise Yahweh. Well, look here. Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing. That's their personality. They're flamboyant. They're smooth words, like that seducing adulteress. The smooth words, these smooth teachings. Oh, look how nice this church is. Look at all of these. Look at these statues. Look at this, all this stained glass. Look at all of this. Isn't it beautiful? Surely nothing but righteousness flows from this stuff. That's the personality. But the character, what's the character? Inwardly, they're ravening wolves. What are they doing? They're teaching those old laws are done away with. They are showing the utmost disrespect to Yahshua Messiah, to the prophets who died for these things, to the prophets, to the apostles, to Yahweh himself. That's their character. And that's what Yahshua is saying here. Beware of these false prophets. Judge these things according to what their character is. You will know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes from thorns or figs from thistles? Likewise, every righteous tree brings forth righteous fruit, but a tree of evil brings forth the fruit of iniquity. A righteous tree cannot bring forth the fruit of iniquity, nor can a tree of evil bring forth the fruits of righteousness. Every tree which does not bring forth righteousness, fruit is cut down, or righteous fruit is cut down and cast into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits, by their works, by their fruits, by the results of their character, how they conduct themselves, what they do, you're going to know whether they are righteous or evil. So we're on page 81, men, and I think we're going to stop right here, about the top here of 81, where it's verse 17, where it says, notice every righteous tree. We'll stop there, and the Great Kahan will pick up there next week. So with that, men, may Yahweh be with you and bless you. May Yahweh protect you and bless your work week.